Good. Okay. Shall we give Ramsey another 5 minutes?
Ramsey's gonna shoot me. Let's see.
I better not do that. I can't do any of this.
Technology.
I hope you're all seeing a slide. Are you all seeing the slide?
Yes.
Okay, good.
We're coming. We're coming. John's
Gotta get that.
John's cleaning some stuff up so that we can sort of half see what's going on.
Okay, so sorry.
All right, we've moved rooms and hoping that we can get through this. We're going to go fast here to finish this thing off. World War I is over, and Frankopan is going to say the shift is happening. After World War I, you pretty much got a reduplication. Well, not before, not after World War I, before World War I. The West is going to do the same as Spain and Portugal 400 years earlier. Try and divide the world up for the benefit of Western powers, resources, markets, this and that, and so forth. And what do we do to? So a perfect example of this. The West trying to divide up the world, or at least the Western powers, the big Western powers dividing up the world to benefit themselves, is something that again was new to me when I'd never read this before. Frankopan, the red line agreement. I mean, there's the red line somewhere in the under circumstances which need to be read in detail for you to completely understand. But in 1929, some interesting entrepreneur says, "Okay, Dutch, French, British, Americans, you know, we can divide this up, and I want to get my 5%. You take all the oil there within the within that red line, and all four of you get 23.75%. I want my 5%." And of course, the various powers say, "Fine, we'll go along with that. We got plenty of oil, and we can." It's no different than OPEC. It is an OPEC. It's just not called OPEC. This time it's to the benefit of Westerners. That is changing faster than we ever acknowledged in our high school, college history course at this time. But the West still thinks it's sort of in charge. I still can't move forward here. Okay. It is in this time period, it's frankly after the stock market has crashed, that the Iranians, call them Persians, Iranians, as you wish, will say, you know, the deal that the British gave us, we were forced to take from the British, is not good enough anymore. And the Shah, this is not the Shah that got thrown out in '79. This is his dad, says, we want a better deal. And the British have no choice but to say, okay, we'll give you a better deal. And the Iranians got a bigger slice of the oil under their own soil. And Frankopan will say, you know, if you look back now, you can see the tide had already turned. The power and the influence of the West was definitely in decline, even though it hadn't declined so far you could necessarily recognize this. Yeah, it is. Why can I not? If we go to the precursor to World War II, this matters to some degree, but so to be moderately patient here. When World War I was over, the French and the British said to Germany, "You're paying for the damn thing. Our taxpayers don't want to pay for it, and we're in gross debt to the British, to the Americans. So you Germans pay for it." And Germans had no choice but to say, "All right, we'll be happy to pay for it. We're going to print useless money tomorrow called marks, and we're going to pay you off with useless money." The French said, "Well, that doesn't work." And the French, who controlled the western half of Germany, said, "We're coming in with our troops, and we're going to mine the German coal ourselves and just take the wealth that we need to get paid." And something like the Taliban operation in Afghanistan recently happened in Germany at that time, where French were being killed in bomb attacks and this and that and so forth. Yeah. To the credit, the United States stepped in. Dawes was the vice president. for Coolidge at that stage and said, we will arrange something. The US, I'm a former banker, Dawes said, I will arrange with private US banks to lend Germany money. Germany is going to be required to pay a lot of that money that the American banks lend Germany to the French and British, and the French and British can pay back the United States. And if you want to, if Germany and France and Britain can suck off a little of that money themselves and rebuild after World War I, fine and dandy. And it worked. There was there was stability in Europe up until 1929. Germany came out of recession and was doing pretty well. Everything seemed as if there was actually going to be peace, thanks, frankly, to Americans willing to sort of bail them out for a profit, of course. There was a second plan called the Young Plan, and that all worked until the stock market crashed. And when the stock market crashed, the US banks who had lent the money, way too much money on speculative buying of stocks, went bankrupt. And when the US banks went bankrupt, of course, there's no more money lent to Germany, and it's soon afterwards that you get this. It's rather disturbing. Hitler's going to be in power. Germans are confused as hell, scared to death. This has been the second time they've lost all their money in inflation, and they're willing to try a nutcase. We see this all over the planet these days. I think we'd have to admit that that's Bolsonaro may in fact win in Brazil, which is beyond belief. Now that Hitler's in charge, he's going to reinstate what has been in German minds for some time. This notion that Germany is a great country, it's hemmed in on both sides, it needs more agricultural space to feed its the growing empire that Germany is destined to have. Where's that great agricultural space? It's just where John has been talking to you about for weeks now. It's the Ukraine and southern Russia, where the great steppes with this enormous fertile land is going to produce enormous amounts of wealth. The Germans calculate this out quite brutally and say that there's the purple. The purple is what they want. That's this enormous swath of fertile land. This is where that's surplus. There's more grain and other stuff to eat grown there than the people that live there need. Surplus land. And they say, once we've got it, the people that were depending on that may not get it anymore because we need it. Too bad the Russians can just starve or move to Siberia. It's rather a brutal idea.
Can you go back just 1 second?
Yeah, I'll go back. I hope I'll go back. Try to.
So just notice that Crimea is a different color. And I'll come back and talk about that at some point.
Okay, sorry, I'm going too fast. I screwed up. A moment of realization comes for the Germans that one, they're not going to get that land anyway, because the Russians are fighting back pretty dramatically, partly because we are rearmed. Well, to a large degree, partly because we're rearming them, partly because they're heroic. And once they realize they can't feed all the people they're responsible for, they've got to decide who's going to starve. The first people that they choose to starve are the Russian prisoners, something like 1 million, maybe 1.5 million. The second group they decide is going to have to starve is the Jews in the concentration camps. And this, again, was a bit of a revelation to some of us that had maybe heard this once in our life and forgotten it. That it's at this moment that the final solution becomes part of the Nazi strategy. And of course, the Nazis are going to be beaten. In the meantime, in the back door to United States and Britain supplying the heroic Russian troops with armament, ammunition, and so forth, Britain and the United States have taken over Iran. The Shah is not happy with it. This is the father of the Shah that we're familiar with, and so the British and Americans just get rid of him, and you install this wimpy kind of spoiled brat son that we will later call as the Shah. And Frankopan says that it's this moment, not until late, that the United States is going to try and get control of things and say the British can't handle it anymore. It's our turn, or whether we like it or not, we're going to have to come in and run the world the best we can for our benefit, maybe the benefit of others, whatever. And Frankopan, I've used this quote over and over again. It's all one, it's all fine and dandy to posture about democracy and human rights and all that. But if you're going to support brutal regimes at the same time, the day will come when you're not credible anymore. And of course, that day is probably way past at this stage of history. So and World War I will be, World War II will be over. Well, this is an aside. Before we get to 1953, while Roosevelt's still alive, one of his and there's a meeting with the Lord Halifax of the British and the British. They say, "All right, we're coming in to help you now, we Americans. So here's the deal on the oil. You British can continue to keep the oil in Persia, Iran. We will share Kuwait and Iraq. But Saudi Arabian oil, Bahrain oil, that's American oil, right? Okay, you have no choice but to say yes." In 52, 51, the Iranians will elect a prime minister who says, once I'm elected, we're going to, we Iranians are going to nationalize British oil, all of our oil, it's our oil, we're going to control it. The Americans and the British get together and say that we can't allow that to happen. And the Mossadegh is overthrown, and the Shah, the guy that we call Shah, is installed. We're trying to get somebody to come in. Patient, admit. Okay.
You got about 1 minute.
We got 1 minute. We're done. Our time is good. We got 1 minute. And then Frankopan will say, okay, the United States is going to be kind of running the show now if they can do it well and learn the lessons of 1953. The lessons of 1953, according to Frankopan's way of thinking, is once you install a government, you've got to be good to the propaganda that you're using to justify your leadership of the world. That is human rights, democracy, yada, yada. We don't do that. We support this son of a bitch called the Shah of Iran, and it will pay a heavy price in 79 when he's finally overthrown. To grant anyone that's going to challenge that and say it's a complicated deal, fair enough, it is complicated, but you can't pretend to be on the side of human rights and support a son of a bitch like we do in Saudi Arabia these days, and we don't know what to do about that either. So I think we're about done. You can argue. This is not Frankopan, this is me. One could argue, I would argue, that 1954 is about the high point of American unchallenged influence in the world. 54, we overthrow Guatemala. They elect the Guatemalan government. Why do we do that? Because the Guatemalan government is going to nationalize the unused, used land that the United Fruit Company owns in Guatemala. And then the United Fruit Company doesn't want that to happen. But it's also in 54 that we take over from France and Vietnam, and that won't end well. In 47, there's this famous Dixie mission that is recommended to Truman. Said, don't go with Chiang Kai-shek. He's corrupt as hell. Mao Zedong may be a communist, but they're going to win. You should back Mao Zedong, and we backed the wrong guy. 61, Eisenhower tries to invade the Bay of Pigs. Kennedy goes along with it. It's idiotic. We leave in 73 in Vietnam. 74 through 80, we have stagflation. 1970s to the present, middle class wages have stagnated. We've got cultural wars because the Republicans realize this is a winning effort against blacks and others and so forth, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. One can argue that the 54 might have been the high point of US influence, though it seems to others that maybe we're still in charge. If you take that same graphic once before and just look at the 1950s, it's around the 1950s when, if this graphic has got any truth to it at all, the high point of Western influence in the world is sort of peaks. And it's going to inevitably, of course, it's going to inevitably. I mean, most of the people live in Asia, after all. Why not? But inevitably, according to Frankopan, the center of the world is going to shift back more toward Asia. That's another thesis. So Iko has given me 5 more minutes here. That's it.
Well, after today's glitches, you deserve more. And I apologize. But we just get too far from our router, and I've got a plan. So this will never happen again. Questions, comments?
It's already 1:03, we recognize, so people need to go and do what they, not 1:03, but 3 o'clock, 3:03. So people need to go and whatever.
I thought the Burns documentary about the Holocaust was interesting. They, at one point, he mentions that there was an option for the final solution to ship all the Jews to Madagascar and let them die and starve in Madagascar. You ever heard about that?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, Frankopan writes about it, but he didn't, he says, you know, it was, they kind of battered around every now and then, but never took it terribly seriously. I mean, yeah, it was on the table. It was, and so it shows up in Frankopan for sure. But I mean, that whole scheme was so nuts that it was not likely to happen anyway. The people, when people first read Frankopan, there were a lot, it was widely praised. One of the strongest statements, I think it was from someone from the Guardian. No, it was from the Financial Times. Financial Times says, it's rare when you read a book that really forces you to reorient your whole view of history, especially when you're nearly 80 years old or already 80 years old, and there's not much time left to reorient what you thought was true. I mean, this was the goal of Frankopan, to say, you know, can we sort of retell the story of what's going on, has been going on for a long time, including the West, and stop and back off on the mythologizing about, frankly, the Declaration of Independence, life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, or whatever that was. I mean, that's written by a slaveholder, for God's sake. I mean, surely it is time to be a little bit more honest about that. But obviously, there's a large segment of America that's just not willing to do so yet. Just as Germans were not willing to do so as World War II showed up. I suppose I'm blabbing on now because there was no questions. Janet and I just watched Zakaria. Zakaria's got many of you probably watch it on Sunday. He ended yesterday by saying, let me just share you some good news. Let's talk about Germans. Let's talk about Germans who, when we were young, I remember going to history class and saying, and reading and debating about the German problem, whether there's something wrong with, I don't know, German genetics or German civilization or German society, so that they'll never be quite civilized. I mean, they're just prone to this kind of stuff. I think we probably are doing that with Russians right now. And certainly we've been doing it for decades now with Muslims. It's just such hogwash, and yet it sure wins votes. And whatever, questions?
I'll just comment that that little splotch of yellow that was Crimea on the map that showed Hitler's plans. There was a connection between Nazis and Tatars, and Stalin thought that there was enough evidence that even before World War II was over, he sent all the Tatars to Uzbekistan. And I think it was hundreds of thousands. And they only started coming back in 1991. So that little yellow splotch on the map has an interesting story behind it.
Well, another thing, John, is that Crimea was part of Russia in the SSR, in the USSR until 1953, when Khrushchev gave Crimea to Ukraine. So
Right.
there's Khrushchev had done work in Ukraine and was sympathetic to the Ukrainians.
Khrushchev.
He
So there
was, he was
Khrushchev's
Ukrainian.
Ukrainian.
He was.
yeah, so he the bottom line is that Russia did have Ukraine for a long time. There's Crimea.
Well, yeah, yes and no. Let's you and I and other people talk about this after we've all read Snyder's essay on the history of Crimea. The actual control that Russians had over Crimea was less clear. Let's read that. I've read it once. I'm going to read it again, and we can discuss that, Jim.
Okay, I think we're, you gonna sign off here?
Yeah, we're going to sign off, and I'm going to just apologize. What we do on this is expect that there might be some people showing up, and